Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Well, I spoke to my mother last night, and I told her I was coming to Holland, and she says, "You're not going to Holland to tell the Dutch people about cows, are you?" So this is why everybody needs a mother, is to keep them humble, right? So anyways, I'll try to tell you a little bit about our experience, especially working with baby calves. And we've been working now maybe for 20 years on different types of social rearing systems for baby calves. And I look forward to your questions and your ideas as well, of course. I'll just start off by, perfect. Okay, so just to remind us what sort of a natural social group would be like for cattle is a mixed age group, typically bulls on the periphery, so cows with young of the year and other young. This is actually a picture from Brazil that I took of this cow-calf system. Because of course, if I go back to Canada, our calves look probably something like, like your calves. This is from our own calf barn. Individual stalls, and we actually use this only for research now, that we keep the calves just one-on-one. More typically, and you can see in this system, makes it very easy, these are sides that you can just pull out. And so when you pull out, then all of a sudden you have two calves together. So this is, when I talk about social groups, it can be as simple as two calves together. And this is exactly the same as one pen, it's just I've taken the board out. So there's feed in front of both, there's water, there's everything the calves need, very simple. It's no more space, it's no more expensive, right? It's exactly the same. What actually, and this is, I mean, after doing many years of work on on social rearing for calves, what our farm staff like to use when we're not doing experiments is this kind of housing. This is, we run these as small groups. No more than 8 calves is my preference. So in a group like this, and we keep the calves here until at least 2 weeks after weaning. So nice and stable. Then we take all the calves out and we clean it and we leave it empty for a week before we bring new calves in, new baby calves in. So it keeps a very high health status for the calves. I'll also tell you briefly, we've been doing some work in keeping cows and calves together as well. And one way that we've been done it actually is using these calf bras. These are made by Bilaval. I mean, they're made by a number of people, but this is it's one way of keeping calves and cows together, but still controlling the milk feeding. Yeah. And I think that's important. We can talk about that later. But for all calf rearing, some type of gentle weaning is important. And this is maybe one idea for some people anyways in terms of how to do it. This is one way which we've done cows and calves together. This is just using our own freestall barn. These are the cows in the freestall. This is the alleyway, and in this setup we have the calves in the day in there, and then at night we have it all open. The calves come back and forth. But we've done a bunch of different setups with cows and calves in different types of management systems. But I wanted to show you one slide for what this looked like. Okay, one of the things that really got me thinking about maybe some of actually Jan and I were talking about farm blindness earlier today too. This idea that, of course, we get used to what's on our own farm. We get used to what cows are like and calves are like. And this experiment really made me think differently about cows. So let me show you what we did here. So here we had calves either by themselves in that individual pen, or this is just the pair. 2 of them, we just removed the separation, so we have 2 calves together. This is after weaning. The calves had been in the pen already for a week, but of course every baby calf eventually goes into a group, right? And so this was what has happened to those baby calves when we first put them in the group. So these calves are already eating solid food; they've already been weaned, but we put them into this new pen as a group together. So there were some calves in the same pen, some that had been alone, reared alone, and then some reared in pairs. They all go together. The ones that were reared in pairs the first day they don't eat too much solid food, but after 2 or 3 days they're eating fine, and then of course as they get bigger they eat more. The calves that have been reared by themselves, if you look at them, and we have, of course, so I'm a behavior person, so we spend lots of time watching the calves do this crazy thing of sort of wandering around, like they can't, it seems almost they can't find the feeder, or they can't make sense of it. They can't make sense of anything that's new, including, of course, all these other calves that they've never dealt with. So it made me wonder, well, what's going on, what are we doing when we rear the calves the way we do it? And what kind of longer term effects might that have on the animals? So I'm going to show you, just very briefly, slides of it's going to seem like a crazy experiment, but it gets inside, I think, what's happening inside the calf's head during this time. So what we did here is a very simple type of training, and actually the calves are very quick. I think they're faster than a dog in learning this kind of training things. So what we had here is we put in every calf pen, we have it set up with a beautiful television screen, and when the screen was red, the calf went and it stuck its nose on the screen and it knew that we would give it milk. If the screen was white, it didn't get any milk. Let me show you what this looks like. So here's the thing, it hits this button, it's red, it goes to it, touches it, and it goes back and has some milk. So it's this is a happy calf, right? Touches the button, the screen's white, it doesn't go. Goes, touches the button, goes gets some milk, right? So they learn this very quick, they're very smart, right? So they just learn it very quick. And then I'll just show you what this. So here is how long it takes for them to learn. So of course they start off the first session, they get it all wrong. But over time, these are the socially housed calves. After a few training sessions, they get to be very good and they always go to the red and they never go to the white. That's when they're socially housed. When they're individually housed, they also learn, no problem. This is good, right? Okay. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, can I make a quick remark?
Yeah.
All this research, so the Nederlands. Okay, I'll first explain to you then, sorry about that. Your research has been done by calves, on calves that have been housed individually until breeding. And in the Netherlands, I would say 90% of the farmers will house the calves individually for 14 days and then they go in a group.
So I'm going to talk about different times of grouping in a second. I'll come to that.
Oh, excellent. But good. What everybody to understand is
when you group. When you group. Let's come back to that in a second. That's very important here. So then you have calves here. So and this is these calves. These are calves about 4 weeks old, 4 to 6 weeks old. All this stuff. So then, and this is very common in any kind of, and maybe you guys have dealt with this, a cow that every day you walk her to the parlor or you come in on this side and then you change her to the other group and you try to walk her on the other side and she won't go, right? It's like, oh my goodness. Or the same thing if we change the feed or we change anything sometimes for an animal, it seems like change is very difficult. So here's a case, all we do is the calves have learned this and then the next day you go and you change the rules. All of a sudden, the white is a good one and the red is a bad one. And here you have, and it's the same thing, here's the socially housed animals. After 2 or 3 days, it looks like they're getting them all wrong. Of course, from their point of view, they're getting them all right because they're still going to the red one. Yeah. But then, they try, okay, it works, and they learn the new rule and they get it. Yeah. The individually housed don't get it. And we've now done this in 3 different experiments, and it's the same thing. The individually housed animals are okay to learn the first time, but they're not good about when things change on the farm. And I think this can be important practically. But coming back to Jan's question, well, what does grouping mean? So we've done lots of different types of grouping, as I explained. Sometimes we keep the calves together all through their life. Sometimes we put them in pairs at an early age. Typically on our farm we do 2 or 3 days of age, sometimes a week. But sometimes also later, 4, 5, 6 weeks, we've done different ages. And here is that very sort of, this is the cow-calf group. And I'll just show you different types of effects that can have on the animals. So here we have individual rearing. This is when they are grouped together later in life. Here's when they're grouped together very early in life. And here is when they're grouped with a cow. And this is the amount of time, the number of calves that are success in that reversal learning when we change the rules. And you can see that the early grouping seems to be important for the success in that reversal learning. And I'm going to show you one other thing. This will seem familiar to you too. When you do something new to a cow, this is a baby calf, and it's the first time it's seen this crazy thing. It's a ball, and it's there looking at the ball. And so it's a way you can just test to see how the animals respond to these novelty. And here is a different experiment, individually reared. This is a pair reared from an early age. These are calves at 4 weeks of age. These have been paired from birth. And these are the ones in the complex cow-calf group. And the ones in the complex cow-calf group showed less of the fearfulness. They approach new things more quickly. And to give you a sense of practically why that might be important is that I talked to you earlier about bringing the cows in from one side to the other. And other things we do to cows and calves is we give them different types of food, depending on the season, depending on what's cheap, what's available. So here we did an experiment, and these calves had already been feeding them. We've been feeding them concentrate. We've been feeding them a mixed ration, but we never before given them this type of long stem hay. But of course, it's not that unusual for animals to have that, so we thought we'd also give them something very unusual, which we just took carrots, we chopped carrots. So these are 2 new foods for a calf. The calf had never seen them before. And we put calves that came again from individual and a social versus a social group. And you can see that for both the hay intake and for the carrot intake, the animals which were socially housed, even though it's on their first day, consume much more of the new food. And it's the same thing. We think it's also driven by this fear response. Both the learning, this better ability to learn new things and this being less fearful of new things helps them, makes them easier to handle for these kinds of challenges when they're having to deal with something new on the farm. This is and this has been now repeated in many projects, both in our group. This is work coming from our group, but also from other groups as well. So you put all this together of an animal that's less fearful, but also, and I haven't had a chance to talk about that, but when you keep animals in groups, they also become very good at learning from each other. And so if you look what's going on here, this is the intake as the calves get older, but this is all pre-weaning. This is how much solid food do they eat. And of course, when we talk about gentle weaning, one way of making weaning gentle for a calf is that if it's already eating lots of solid food before you take away the milk. So in this case, what we're doing is all these calves are reared in exactly the same way in terms of their nutrition, but we have different types of environments. We have individual house, we have late grouping, and we have early grouping. In this case, I don't have the cow-calf groups together because in that environment it's very hard to measure intake because the calves, of course, also go eat the cow's food. So in this case, it's very easy for us to measure intake. And what you can see is that, and again, in a number of studies we've seen this, it's the early grouping that really start, even at this very early age, they start eating more food. And we think that's because both they are better learners, they're less fearful, but they're also doing the social learning. Every time one calf gets up to eat, the other calf sees it as well. We see the same things in pigs, of course. And what's important here is the calves are then weaned at this age. So you can see that early intake of solids here is really helping in terms of solid intake even after weaning. So that's helping them get through weaning better. Okay, so I just wanted to, in terms of wrap up, the most important messages, I think, for people that are thinking about grouping. Of course, there's lots of ways we can group. We can go all the way to having cows and calves together, but I think that also we can do very simple things. For people that are currently managing their calves individually, is this idea of just putting 2 calves together is a very simple way of managing the calves that provides for many benefits. In order to get that to work, it's really important, the feeding system. This is a whole other line of research, but very much promote high intakes of milk, and that it's important also that the calves be fed milk from a nipple, because that means that more natural nursing system means that it's going to reduce the risk of any kind of cross-sucking of calves. This gentle weaning is extremely important, and there's a number of ways that that can be achieved. One thing that we do for calves, for the milk feeding calves, when we're feeding calves milk ourselves, is we put them on very high milk intakes in the first weeks of life, and then we bring down the milk at about 4 weeks of age, and then bring milk down, and then slowly wean again at about 7 weeks of age. So we can get high intakes of milk at an early stage when the calves can only drink milk, right? When they're nutritionally too immature to be able to eat solid food. And the final message I wanted to say is the importance, of course, if you are using larger groups, is the importance of a high health status. And one aspect that we found very important is both keeping the group size small, but also managing those groups so you don't have new baby calves coming into an old group of animals. So we keep one age group, we keep it intact, and then all at once we clean that pen out and bring new animals in. So again, it's an old idea from the pig industry. I just wanted to thank again the organizers for inviting me to come. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet some of my Dutch colleagues. And I also want to thank, of course, our own Canadian farmers that support my research. So thank you very much.
Zijn er vragen of discussiepunten?
Ik heb één vraag. I have one question. What's your experience that the better they feed, the calves that are in the social group, that it is the security of the group itself, so the social structure that gives them the boost forward, or is it the challenge that the calves in the group give the calf for its feeling of security? So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about how it feels.
yeah.
No,
but
yeah, but
you can
but it's
have
good.
an idea.
Yeah. So I mean, my thing, I know that at weaning, a calf that doesn't have enough to eat is a very unhappy calf, and so I know that bit. That if we get the calves more interested in solid feed at a younger age, that makes weaning easier, and that's better for the calf. But I'm not. I think that what's happening socially is partly is the ability to learn, and maybe also this bit of. Yeah, I don't know whether it's a sense of social security. I think that also maybe even just a little bit. Of course, you don't want a lot of competition that means the calves cannot get to the feeder. But the idea that there's another animal.
They are less fearful. So the less
They are less fearful for sure.
Yeah, the less fearfulness
yeah.
doesn't come from the security you have from the group, or does it mean he has the challenges from interacting with the other calf? That it gives that he is more likely to get challenged, so he is more likely to get over his fear.
So this result that animals, baby animals that are kept by themselves, end up. It's not just fearful; it's what they say hyper responsive. So too responsive to any kind of change. And if you think about it, and this comes from lots of. It's not just this is a new calf work, but we've known this for 50 years. For example, there's some experiments that were done on baby monkeys a long time ago. Horrible experiments.
Yeah,
but this idea that if you have an animal, you get the animal that the animal is a creature of its own environment, I guess you could say. So it makes sense. If you keep the animal that's very simple, imagine our hutch, our calf hutch.
If it is,
What does it need to do? All it needs to do is it needs to know where to find the milk. It has this very simple world. And so it has the right skills for dealing with that. But then if we put the animal all of a sudden into a very complex environment, it doesn't have those skills for how to deal with that. And so this idea, so the animal has never been exposed to very many changes, and so it is unable to, or is very responsive to those changes when they do happen. Animals, as soon as you put even just two animals together, the world becomes much more complex, right? And now all of a sudden have to deal with this other individual. So I just think that the cognitive challenge of having to deal with this changing world is much different, even with two. And of course, if you have a more complex group, then it becomes even more challenging. And so the calves then become better problem solvers. Now that doesn't matter if we were always to keep our calves in hutches until their fifth lactation. That's not a problem, of course. Maybe it'd be better.
Yeah.
But if you keep the animals in a complex, and if you want animals to be able to succeed in complex environments, it looks like these early experiences are important in terms of their development of those skills.
And it's more likely that it is a consequence of the social structure, the backup system from a social structure.
I think that we could get it, I think it's the challenge. So I think it would be, you know, if you reared the calf in this conference room that was having to deal with all of us, it would probably also be very good, a better problem solver, and it would be less scared of normal things. But it's just that you keep in this very simple environment. For, of course, the easiest way to give a calf a more complex environment is just put it with another calf, or some other calves.
You talk about the group size.
Yeah.
Groups around 8 is the best. On what things can you base it on?
Yeah. I mean, I think
what happens if it gets bigger?
Yeah.
Let's say 20.
So the question is about group size. Yeah. And so every calf manager is different. And I've seen some barns where guys are very successful with bigger groups of animals, so it's possible.
Yeah.
That number, let's say about 8, comes from many different studies where all of a sudden the risks, and it doesn't mean it will happen with every manager. Some managers are able to control the other risks very well. But on average, the risks become higher once you go into these larger groups. And that's why my recommendation is always with a farmer that has always had individual calves, to me the best group size to start. Because it's a management challenge, it's very different. 2 is easy, 3 is pretty easy too, but even actually 7 or 8, that's a different skill set. That doesn't come overnight to be able to manage a group of that size. And then a group of, you know, if you have a group of 20 or 30, 2 things. One is that managing disease, I think even under the best conditions becomes more difficult. But the other issue I mentioned earlier about this the ability to do all in, all out becomes, unless you have 5,000 cows, okay, then you can maybe do it. But under our normal farm size, managing all in, all out is hard to do if you have very large groups. And so then what you tend to have, if you have 30 calves, you know, one milk, to me, like I think of one which requires very high management. 30 calves all sharing a single milk feeder. You have the baby calves coming in, the older calves there. As I say, I've seen people do it, but it's not what I would choose to do, even on our farm where I think we have got excellent management. Yeah.
Thanks.
The cows at the age when before weaning, they are getting colostrum and they are part of growth, like vitamin A, they are getting from their mother cows. But at weaning, they from different group, they are going to panic. The stress is going to be affected to the animal. So how they are affected the growth system, how they are getting their proper mineral like hypocalcemia, hypoanemia, all kind of diseases very accumulate to that animal. So how they are creating the groups, the 2 groups, then going to ladder, the animal is very panic. So how it affects its fooding system, their nutritional balance of that cow.
To me, I think there are, of course, many ways in which we can add stress to an animal's life. And one way is these regroupings that we often do on farms for practical reasons. Of course, every calf, as I explained here, every calf is eventually grouped into larger groups somehow. And we were talking earlier about disease problems and respiratory disease in calves, for example, is, I think, for me, partly associated with sometimes actually stresses of regrouping. One of the messages, I think, from what I'm explaining here is if you have animals that have early social experience, they are better able to deal with changes, including social changes. So I think the stress associated with that is reduced. You're also asking about how that interacts with nutrition, I think. And I think that can be a very complex issue, the interaction between stress and nutrition. But just very simply, in terms of what I'm saying, is that, of course, if an animal is not eating at all, maybe partly because of the stress of regrouping, but also because it is unable even to work out, where up and down. I think really for our calves, how even to operate this new feeder is what they were unable to do. So obviously if the calf is not eating at all, then you're adding yet another stressor, in this case a nutritional stressor on the animal. Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
There's one in the back too. Kim.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah. Last question?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, then I gotta say, you guys have to decide. Margaret, you decide. Last question.
There is also space at lunchtime and during
Yeah.
the guided tour to
Yeah,
speak
yeah.
with them, of course.
Yeah.
Helene, can I give you the last question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. I wonder the difference that you noticed between the cows in groups and the ones that were raised in solitary confinement.
Don't say that.
Are these
Normal.
effects long term? I mean, do you also notice a difference in response to changes in their environment and changes in their feed on the long term?
So, for the experiments I showed you, we haven't followed those calves out long enough to say. What I do know is from work now that's just starting to come out. So one of the problems is when you do an experiment with a calf at 6 weeks old or 2 weeks old, and then you look at the effects 3 years later. To do a nice experiment at 2 weeks old, you need maybe 30 calves. To do a nice experiment where you do the treatment at 3 weeks, and then you look at the effects 3 years later, you need 2,000 calves. So you need it's a very different type of study. For one part of this, which I haven't really had very much chance to talk about, but this idea of feeding calves more milk, we now know, after many years of people have been doing this, that those effects on the very important effects on the calf, so of course you feed the calf more milk, you get a bigger calf. We now know after, now it's been a dozen years with very many studies, including some studies which give longer term data, thousands of hours, that those effects work very well. So I can't say for sure in terms of these behavioral effects, I don't know. But we do know from the work I talked about earlier in the primates, in the monkeys, and also in the rodents, that these are lifelong effects. But that work hasn't been done on cattle.
Thank you very much then for your time.